welcome to Go Vote Omaha, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Mary Lee Moulton, a League member and your host. Each program, we talk about important public policy issues, and we hope that you'll discuss these issues, and when it's time, election time, we hope you'll be ready and willing to go and vote. Our guest today is Kate High of the League of Women Voters of Lincoln, Lancaster. Kate is a lifelong Nebraskan who grew up in Albion. She graduated from Doane University with a degree in political science and completed her Master's of Education at Washington University in St. Louis. She worked for almost 30 years for the Department of Health and Human Services. She has spent the last 3 years, however, investigating money and politics in Nebraska for the League of Women Voters. Thanks for being with us, Kate.
Thank you, Mary Lee, for having me.
So why don't you start by talking about why you decided to take this project on?
Well, I was interested in money and politics. I read about it nationally and across what was going on in California and New York, but I didn't know what was going on in Nebraska, so I thought this is an opportunity to learn more. And since it's such a big topic, I scoped it down to the 2016 Nebraska legislative races and to see just what it is I could find out.
Okay, so in your, you wrote 2 reports so far about this, and in your reports you looked at several aspects of how money influences politics in Nebraska. You looked at dark money, you looked at donation limits, donation tracking in Nebraska, and the revolving door in our legislature. So let's start with dark money. Tell us about the 2 kinds of dark money, the 501c money and the unitemized donations.
Dark money, just as a general definition, is anytime we don't know the source, where the money came from. So at the national level, and it also happened here in Nebraska, when 501c4 corporations get involved in politics and they make donations, they don't have to disclose where they got their money. So that is called dark money. And here in Nebraska, we definitely had some dark money contributions. One of them was $600,000. So that is a significant amount of dark money that has been used to affect the outcome of elections. But Nebraska has another special kind of dark money, and I call it the $250 black hole. In Nebraska, we don't have to itemize donations. Candidates don't have to itemize donations that are $250 or less, which is significantly different than other states. It's 2.5 times the national average. So we have a great deal of money that comes in unitemized. When a candidate completes their campaign finance report, they have to list all their donations. They list the name and the address and the amount of each donor, each donation. But if the contribution is $250 or less, they just have to just list it as a cumulative total.
Okay, so there's like a pool at the end.
Right, just a big lump sum of money that is just reported. And in the Nebraska legislative races in 2016, 23% of all of the money came in as unitemized. That is a lot of money that we don't know where it came from. It's a significant source, in my estimation, of dark money.
Okay. Now, when the legislature's in session, the lobbyists help candidates raise money. So tell us about the breakfasts and how dark money is used at these breakfasts during the legislative session.
It's almost funny, except it's serious. But when the legislature is in session, it may be that lobbyists will hold a fundraiser right before a very important piece of legislation is going to be voted on. And they all have them come over for breakfast, and at the breakfast, they start distributing $250 checks and less. So let's imagine that the vote is going to be on tobacco, and nobody likes to have tobacco lobbyists and tobacco money showing on their campaign finance reports. So they go to the breakfast and they collect thousands of dollars in these small $250 donations. And then they can put their money in their pockets, their bellies are full, and they can immediately go into the unicameral and vote on the bill.
Mm-hmm. So do other states allow this type of fundraising during their sessions?
The great majority of states ban this. Nebraska is only one of 7 states that allow this.
Okay. So the federal elections have limits on individual donors. Does Nebraska have any limits?
Nebraska has no limits on the amount of money any individual can donate.
Okay. And so you could give $10,000 to a candidate, you could give $100,000.
Literally, the sky is the limit. There is no limit. Nebraska is one of the very few states that does not have an established limit on how much an individual may donate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And What about foreign donors? I know we've had a lot of consternation in the country over foreign meddling in elections. Can a foreigner give money in a Nebraska election?
Well, technically, there is no law in Nebraska that prohibits the practice, but there is a federal law that may cover us. But in fact, most states have taken and incorporated in their own campaign finance laws at the state level that prohibits foreign donations.
Okay, but Nebraska hasn't incorporated this
No,
into
this
its
is
state
not
law.
technically in Nebraska, but it's very difficult to track because when someone donates, they're not asked what their citizenship is, and there is no check the box, I declare that I'm a U.S. citizen, so it's very hard to enforce.
Because in the federal, there is a box that you have to check
Yes,
that you're a
yes.
U.S. citizen, but they don't have that in Nebraska.
No, I mean, you collect the checks at the fundraiser.
Okay. So does Nebraska have any limits on non-individuals like PACs and unions and corporations?
Nebraska does not make any distinction between non-individuals. They have only two categories that people can donate in. You're either an individual or you're a non-individual. So there is no donation. So Nebraska has no limits on the amount that a union can donate, a PAC, a political action committee, or a corporation.
Okay. And do the other states have limits on things like that?
Most states will divide that and make individual contribution limits according to the category. So some states might ban all corporate contributions, but they might set a limit for political action committees or a separate donation limit for a union.
Okay. So talk about the states that are right around us, because here in Nebraska, we like to think of ourselves as being, true Midwesterners. We don't, necessarily care what they're doing on either coast. We're really concerned about what other Midwesterners are doing. So what are places like Iowa and Colorado doing?
Well, that's what I think too, is that what goes on in California seems so separate and distinct, and New York and Florida. So I wanted to look at what does Wyoming and Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, South Dakota, what are their campaign finance rules? And if I could just draw just a small picture, Colorado is up here in campaign finance regulation, and the rest of the state,
very restricted.
They
Okay,
have the
lots of
most. They
rules.
have the most regulated rules, very much defined. And then we have this other group that are kind of the remaining surrounding states. They have some rules and some rules that match up. But if we would say, where is Nebraska in this mix? We'd have to put ourselves down here. We are the most unregulated in campaign finance rules of all of the surrounding states.
Okay. So really quickly, we have a podcast now that we do with this. So for those joining us on the podcast, we're talking to Kate High of the League of Women Voters of Lincoln Lancaster about her studies on money and politics in Nebraska. So with all this money and politics and things like what goes on at these breakfasts before people vote on things, does it influence not only legislation but government contracts? And is there any sort of check on this?
That's called pay for play.
Okay.
And that's where people who are interested in getting a contract with the state of Nebraska will go in and make big donations or donate in the effort. It's not a bribe, or it's not trying to pay, quid pro quo, but it's buying access, it's buying friendship, it's buying goodwill. So when your contract bid is reviewed, it will be seen in a very positive way.
Okay.
And Nebraska has no limit on this at all. And this is where the rules about our no campaign limits. So literally, during this contract bidding process, corporations and individuals are completely legal to donate any amount of money.
Okay. And so theoretically, there's no Chinese wall. We don't know what any particular company has donated. It's very, very much apparent. People are easily told what a company's donated.
Yes,
down the line.
Yes,
Okay.
very much so.
And so in your report, it was really interesting. You talk about this case called the Centene case. So why don't you tell the viewers about what you found in this particular case?
Well, it was something I just stumbled on. When I started looking at campaign contributions, a lot of times it's very easily recognizable names that you know from Nebraska, but I ran across the name of Centene, and I frankly just didn't know what it was, and so I started backtracking. And oh my goodness, Centene is a Fortune 500 company that was involved in the largest contract that was ever bid in the state of Nebraska. And it just happened to be in 2016 when I was covered during this time period that I was looking at. And what happened is that Centene wanted this Medicaid managed contract, which was huge. And they went in and they gave huge amounts of donation to state senators and to various political party and to the governor's office. And they just overwhelmed all the other bidders. And they got the bid. And then, oh my goodness, things just went awry. There was lots of complaints. And one of the losing bidders attempted to sue in court, saying that the bidding system was flawed, that Centene had lied in the bidding process, and that the way that the scores was not right. And what they found out is that in Nebraska, there is no right to judicial review in the contract procurement process. So so Centene was allowed to move forward, and there was just lots, after they were awarded the contract, and in January of 2017, the contract went into effect. And it was only a matter of weeks before people started complaining they weren't getting paid, providers weren't getting paid, Medicaid clients weren't getting the services they thought they needed. And the Inspector General came in and did a report and recommended that Centene be sanctioned. That's with a money fine. And it turned out that the state senator who had received the largest donations just spoke up for them and defended them and stopped the fine and the sanction.
Okay.
So Centene has been fined $23 million in other states, but they escaped the sanction in Nebraska.
Wow, that's an amazing situation. And so our judiciary can't review any of these contracts then?
No,
Okay.
that's complicated, but there is no judicial review. If a contract bidder, if you put in a bid and you don't get it, you have a right to meet with the agency head, who is a political appointee.
Okay. So tell us about the Nebraska Accountability and Disclosure Commission and what it is that they do.
The Nebraska
Because
Accountability...
you would think that they were, policing all of this.
Well, I call it the NADC because it's a long word, but they are the watchdog for campaign finances. And the Nebraska Accountability and Disclosure Commission got formed in the wake of the Watergate years, when all of the campaign finance irregularities became very obvious. So it was an attempt to rein in and get some rules into place. So since that time, it is a small commission, but all the reports, anybody who raises or spends $5,000 has to file periodic campaign reports with the commission.
And most people who are in the legislature are raising at least that $5,000.
There was only one candidate in one race, District 11, which is Ernie Chambers, that did not file a campaign report.
Did not file a campaign
So that would just mean that he did not raise or spend $5,000 on his race.
Okay, so can you talk about the impact of how these donations are reported and disclosed, and how that influences what the public really knows about what goes on with the donations?
All the information that we know about campaign finances comes through these periodic reports.
Okay.
And if the report is late, they're fined $25 a day for every day the report is late, up to a maximum of $750.
Okay. Now, does this happen very often? Are people late very often?
Well, in 2016, which is the year that I looked at, I just want to say that is the big policy, but the way that it actually plays itself out, that in 2016 there was $180,000 in late fees that were excused, and the person that was late just didn't have to pay them, because they've created a process that the first time a report is late, they totally excuse it. You don't have to pay us anything. And the second time it's late, you pay $25. And then the third time you have to pay the full amount, up to $750. So that would be kind of a learning process, but it turns out the clock is reset every 2 years and you start over again. So what I discovered is some of the biggest corporations in the world, some of the wealthiest corporations in the world, and some of the wealthiest individuals, and really experienced state senators who ought to know better, were having their fees excused. And it just seemed to be an example of a policy that was created by our elected officials that had benefited them, and it also contributed to a lack of disclosure. That there was when the reports are late, then people don't get an opportunity to see them.
Do you think it's somewhat of a situation where the legislators are kind of flaunting the the only tracking that there is of any of this? That's what it kind of seems like.
Well, I think the rules have been made to the advantage of the people who make the rules. The people who make the rules really benefit from them.
Okay. So if I were going to look at this report and I wanted to know what person, John Snow, donated in Nebraska, how would I find out how much aggregate that person had donated?
Well, it would be very difficult looking at the actual reports because you would have to pull every report and then look up on their list of donations. But there is a website that the Omaha World Herald uses, and I've used that a lot. It's called dataomaha.com, and they have a search bar, and you can put the person's name in, and then a name will pop up, and you can look at their donations. It's very good. I recommend it.
And what if there's a slight deviation in the name? Because in your report you talk about the fact that not everyone reports their name the same way every time they make a donation.
But this is an example of lax enforcement. According to the actual law, and if you look up in the Treasurer's Guide, it says that people have to donate in their legal name. That's the same name that's on your driver's license or your social security card or when you go vote. That's what you use. But when people actually donate, a lot of times they use names like their nickname. Like if their name is Stephen, they'll call themselves Steve. So if they donate one time as Stephen and one time as Steve, it'll look like two separate people. So trying to pull this data out, we have some very wealthy contributors. In one case, someone that's donated over $1 million, and he appears as 4 different individuals on the system.
So it makes it much more difficult to track because if you put in a specific name, you're only going to get back exactly what you put in. You're not going to get,
Right.
nicknames and things like that.
Well,
then.
if you want to start guessing, you say, well, I'll just put this name in and see all the names, like Jones, and then you type in Jones, and then you would see all the different Joneses, and then you would have to say, well, I think this one belongs to this one and this one. So you might end up looking at 4 or 5 different Joneses trying to figure out which one belongs to whom.
And sometimes the addresses aren't the same either.
Yes.
And that makes it even more difficult.
The system, for example, if I moved within this calendar year and I put my one address when I donated this time, and then I listed another address because I moved, I would look like 2 separate people to the system.
Okay. So finally, can you tell us about the revolving door of the legislature? Because that's a little different from other states as well.
Well, revolving door is a term that's used when an elected official leaves office and then they turn around and they come back as a lobbyist. So in most states, it's called a cooling off period, or they use other terms. But in Nebraska, we don't need to be worried about any of it because there is no cooling off.
Okay.
In Nebraska, it's possible to leave work one day and come back hours later as a lobbyist, as a paid lobbyist.
Okay.
Nebraska is only one of 7 states that allows this practice.
And it's possible that person has taken money from that company all the way along and.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. There would not be an objection to that.
Okay. So do other states allow this kind of revolving door? And specifically, what about the states around us?
Most states have, the majority of the states surrounding Nebraska have a 3-month prohibition. They have a 3-month cooling off period. One has 6 months. One has 2 years.
Okay. 2 year sounds.
They have to wait out too. Sometimes they will allow them to come back as volunteer lobbyists, but not paid.
Okay. So Kate, let's talk about some solutions because you've been studying this. Are there particular things that you're interested in seeing the legislature do to try to head off some of these problems?
Well, one of the things that, and it's really brought to mind, is this recent experience of flooding in Nebraska. And I'm going to say right off, I don't think money in politics is the issue. It's the lack of regulation of the money is the issue. And just like we've had, in Nebraska is really blessed by its water resources. We have the wonderful Ogallala Aquifer, and we have more miles of running water than any other state in the union. But when the water gets too much and it runs out of its bank and it's unregulated, what was a blessing is now a calamity. And I think what we have in Nebraska is the money in itself isn't bad, but it's the lack of regulation. So just as a start, we certainly need to put in some limits, campaign finance limits, and we need to separate individuals from non-individuals. That's just like a basic. And I always think, well, here we have these surrounding states, we can certainly look at the best of what's going on in the other states and at least try to come into the mix, the average of the other states. But certainly revolving door, the $250 itemizing really started off because campaign finance reports were so huge and they were all on paper, nothing was on computer. It was they would file reports like this. Well, now with computers and people can just download and pull this, it's really not an issue to just list everything, just include everything on there.
And again, refresh us on what the limits are in like Iowa and Kansas. What's the dollar limit? Is it more like $100?
Well, in Colorado, it's $200.
Okay.
So we had in the last campaign finance, in the 2016, we had a lot of money. I will just say this just as an overview. In Nebraska, the candidates who raise the most win the most. They get most of their money from non-individuals, and most of the donations are $1,000 or greater.
Okay.
So if you would compare this to Colorado, the maximum donation that you could donate to a state legislative race would be $200.
Okay.
That would make a big difference. In some ways, Iowa looks like ours because for individuals, there is no limit, but they totally ban corporations. So that would make a significant difference that about a person that may donate as an individual, then turn around and make a big donation as a corporate, in a corporation. So in that way, every state kind of has its own variation of this, of how they impose their limits.
Okay, so in Nebraska then, we kind of have the problem from both ends. So we've got these really large contributions that there are no regulations on that are flooding into some of these, races that in the past really didn't raise that much money. And then you've got these small donations that you really have a hard time keeping track of.
Right.
So it's kind of like getting squeezed from both ends.
We are getting squeezed. But what I think the emphasis though, and I don't want to use too much statistics here, but 526 donors gave 70% of all the money that went into the race. Then we look at the 23% that is unitemized, so we don't know about that. And that remaining fraction, which I think is about 8%, 7 to 8%, were donations that exceeded the $250 up to the $1,000.
Okay.
So it becomes a narrow wedge. The way winners win is big donations from big donors.
And then these smaller donations that they don't really have to worry about reporting.
Yes. So. And I would just say that I think in Nebraska that we have allowed our state legislative races to become basically auctions. Whoever gives the most, then that's going to be your guy.
Okay. So are there any current bills in the legislature that address any of these issues?
There is nothing that would be systematically changed. Okay. Senator Chambers had a bill that addresses candidate to candidate, campaign committee to campaign committee. In many states that would be banned, and he wanted to put a little bit more rules around it, but it's not going to go anywhere. And then there was also a bill.
So that's if you have money left over in your campaign, you can then give it to another.
Well, or at any point that you can give.
Okay.
The rule is it's supposed to be in regard to a fundraiser. Okay. In Iowa has a similar law that says that you can make a campaign committee to campaign committee donation if it's in reference to a fundraiser. You can buy 2 tickets and you must actually attend. But in Nebraska, it just says it has to be in reference to a fundraiser, but it doesn't say how much you would give that fundraiser. Okay. So there's very large donations, lots of money and influence that flows back and forth.
Okay. And the public in general in Nebraska really isn't very familiar with any of this?
I certainly wasn't. It has really opened my eyes to when I go to I don't go to the unicameral very often, but when I have, I see all this kind of buzzing around, but I don't really understand what it means. But now when I go there, I realize that this is very serious business going on.
Okay. And as far as publicizing this information, are there press people that you've talked to or want to talk to? I mean, how do you get the word out? I know that that your 2 reports are on the League of Women Voters-NE.org website. So viewers and listeners can go to that and actually read the full reports that Kate's done.
Yes, I would recommend. Of course, I wrote them, but then you get to see the full 7-state comparison, which I for me, it was personally very interesting and eye-opening to understand how our laws are so significantly different from our neighboring states.
And now you have a part 3 that's coming too?
Part 3,
so
because
can you give us
I
a little
think
bit of a preview?
Well, I think if you come with a problem, you should come with a solution.
Okay.
And one of the things is that we've talked about a lot of money, but how does that impact it? Is it good? Is it bad? And in what ways has money impacted our legislature? And the other is to coming up with common sense solutions. I really think common sense should prevail on this, and I think everyday Nebraskans understand money and politics very well. They understand when one individual that signs his name different ways is all one individual, and that holding large corporations accountable makes sense.
And when will you be ready with this 3rd report?
Well, I've told people early May.
Okay, so it's coming up. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for being with us to discuss this important topic. I think that you've certainly given all of us a lot to think about, and have given us a bit of an education on how things are really working. So we really appreciate that. I'm Mary Lee Moulton for the League of Women Voters. Remember to go vote Omaha at election time. Thanks very much for being with us this evening.